Hi, my name is George Young and I farm here in Fobbing in South Essex. So we're farming here in Fobbing on around about 650 acres. We also have about 150 acres of rough conservation grazing as well that we hire in from the Essex Wildlife Trust. And then overall we're about 1,200 acres with the off-lying land primarily being farmed under arable at the moment. The soil type here in Fobbing is primarily heavy blue London clay, so we're on some marshes at the moment. We do have some lighter land, so where we are here is about grade 4. We do have some grade 3 land as well here, and then some of the off-lying land, a couple of bits of grade 2, but on the whole grade 3 land. So I've been back on the farm now for 9 years, and when I came back here we were primarily a very straightforward arable farm. So we were growing 3 crops, wheat, rape and peas, in a pretty standard 6-course rotation. We did actually have some livestock then at the time. We had some cattle, but they were just simple store cattle that Dad bought from Ashford Market. And store cattle in that we bought them when they were young and sold them when they were older. They just stayed here on the farm. I basically didn't find that system of farming particularly interesting at the time, and I wanted to change up what we're doing and focus on building ecology on the farm. I also felt there wasn't much resilience in that form of farming either, so I was trying to change up my system to build a little bit more resilience into the farming system. And that's really what I've been doing over the past 9 years. So originally on the farm, when we were just growing those 3 basic crops, I really didn't feel like there was enough diversity in the farm to make sure that we were encouraging enough beneficial insects, and we were facing various kind of pretty standard agronomic problems with some annual grass weeds and other things like that. So the typical stuff like blackgrass, and then of course ryegrass as well, and bromes and things like that. So my initial thought in terms of how to tackle that was to alter up the way that I was farming with other annual arable crops. So I was looking for crops that I could maybe plant later, harvest later, and just kind of mix up those timings of my system. That meant that I was looking at hemp, I was looking at buckwheat, I tried lupins, teff, lentils, various crops, a few of which have stuck about on the farm, so I'm still growing lentils. I did grow buckwheat for a number of years and have just stepped back from the moment, because essentially those crops are really difficult to market. And also it became clear quite quickly that whilst it is good to bring diversity into the arable cropping system, nothing will do as much good as actually, rather than trying to stick within arable cropping, to actually switch to perennial grass crops or mixed ley crops, and actually really try and revitalise my soil and get away from those weed issues in a more kind of cohesive, proper way, with resilience and diversity at their real heart. So it's taken me 9 years, especially it's taken me the last 5 years to come up with an approach to farming that I feel pretty comfortable with. Now that's not to say it's set in stone by any stretch. It's a system which is going to still undertake a huge amount of change, but I feel like I have a kind of baseline of what I'm trying to achieve. The most key part of my rotation is utilising Herbal Leys. We're standing in a Herbal Ley at the moment. I'll be honest, I love the Herbal Leys because they look absolutely stunning and they smell absolutely stunning, and it enables my livestock to really flourish on them. But that's kind of the absolute base for me being able to farm in a really sustainable or regenerative way. So essentially what these are doing is they are restructuring my soil, they're restructuring the nutrition in my soil, so they're moving all that nutrition around as the different plants with different rooting depths really kind of talk to each other and move that nutrition about. What they're essentially enabling me to do is, with 4 years of Herbal Ley, 4 years of this really mixed, diverse, species of grasses and legumes and herbs, is to ensure that I'm then able to mine that for 3 years afterwards of arable farming. So I'm doing 4 years of mixed livestock farming. So at the moment we're using the cows, and then we're going to really improve our soil health and our ecological health. And then we'll be doing 3 years of organic farming after that, once we take this Herbal Ley out. So that's kind of my approach to kind of the specific how we're cropping. And we're looking to utilise older heritage wheats. I've been growing heritage wheats for 5 years now. So we're looking to utilise those after the Herbal Ley. They've got really great rooting systems, so they're also going to tap into all that amazing nutrition that the Herbal Leys and the cows have left behind. But then on top of that, in terms of an overall system, I actually describe myself as an agroecological mixed farmer. So agroecology, I personally split down into 3 key components. The first one is farming with nature, the second one is circular farming, and the third one is food sovereignty. So farming with nature is essentially utilising nature's toolkit to do the jobs on the farm, rather than necessarily using a machine or utilising chemicals or things like that. The second one, circular farming, is then to do with trying to make sure that we maintain all the waste streams on farm. So I'm only exporting actual food products, and any waste products either go back into compost or get fed through an animal and go back on the land. And then the food sovereignty part, which is very topical, here we are in June 2022. Food sovereignty is essentially kind of food security, but actually caring about it. So rather than food security, which is the ability of a nation to feed itself, food sovereignty is to add on top of that the fact that the people who eat that food really understand where it comes from, why it's grown in the way it's grown, and why that's so important. So those three tenets of agroecology really drive every decision I make on the farm. And then my overall approach in terms of the thing I'm most passionate about is building ecology here. Which means having flowering plants is really important, but also having a real great area of permanent organic cover on the farm that doesn't get disturbed is also absolutely critical. And so I'm implementing at the moment something called a wild seam through the middle of my farm, which will ensure that there's basically a nature superhighway through the middle of my farm where all kinds of nature can hang out and also get to every other part of my farm. So I've actually introduced around about 100 hectares of Herbal Leys into the farm over the past 4 years or so. I've long since thought that they were kind of a critical part of building that really kind of sustainable farming model. And what I've done for a start is to bring these Herbal Leys in such that they're kind of close to the farm, to the farmyard itself, and all in predominantly one block or easily located to each other. I've done that because in order to make the very most of the Herbal Leys, I think it's important to be incorporating livestock into them. My choice of livestock was cows. I chose cows because personally I believe that a ruminant is the most important form of livestock to bring in primarily. So obviously I had the choice between sheep and cows. And essentially, historically, my family on both sides have always been into livestock and into cattle. So cattle seemed like the obvious answer for me. And I'll be honest, 20 months in, I absolutely love my red poll cows that I've got. Essentially, it was a decision that much as I had some of the equipment to deal with cattle, we didn't have much in the way of electric fencing. We had a little bit from a sheep trial a few years ago. So I have needed to get the infrastructure, but we've had some of the stuff there to deal with these livestock coming on the farm, provided they're close to the farmyard. We are now working hard on fencing and implementing permanent ring fencing on the farm. And we've also got some ideas now that we're figuring out as to how we can implement semi-permanent electric fencing throughout the farm, which will just make managing that stock a huge amount easier. But we are getting to the stage now that I'm feeling more confident in rolling out these Herbal Leys and rolling out this system a bit more broad scale across the farm, because I've got the kind of techniques that work for us here in Fobbing and work for the way that I manage the farm, so I feel like I can begin to roll it out across the rest of the holding. I established my Herbal Leys with a direct drill. I've actually got a New Zealand style cross slot drill, the Prime West one, built just down the road from Cotswold Seeds as it happened. And essentially I established them that way because that's the only equipment I've got to establish. So I'm not necessarily saying it's the right way, but on the whole we have had an awful lot of success with establishing these Cotswold Seeds Herbal Leys in that way. And even, I mean, the fascinating thing is establishing this way, the one we're in, and actually at this, 2 years ago we established the one that I'm standing in at the moment, and also another 60 hectares on top of this. And that was a year when we established them in April and didn't really get any rain until September. And I'll be honest, I was pulling my hair out, but actually once we got that rain in September they came and they look magnificent now. So I think that says something about the quality of the seed, and certainly something I was very happy about, having had many arguments that summer with my father. But essentially we establish them just with a direct drill. We don't go particularly deep, and then we will go through and roll them afterwards, normally rolling them twice just to try and obviously create that little bit of tilth around the seed. And obviously we try and establish before a rain, but here where we are in the southeast, knowing for sure that you're going to get a rain is pretty difficult. There have been plenty of times when I was sure we were going to get a hell of a downpour, and then you go and put some seed in the ground and the rain disappears. So it's a little bit more hit and miss, but on the whole we've had very good success doing it this way. Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to try other methods, but it's worked so far. For me, diversity in farming is is absolutely critical. It's not a kind of, if you want to put it in, you can. For me, it's like the base of everything I'm doing here. And so the ability to establish something in a field like this, whereby there are around about 30 different species and varieties of things all growing together. I mean, diversity all in one place, where you've got a number of plant families side by side, really revitalising your soil and revitalising your ecology, is absolutely fantastic. More so actually from specifically the Herbal Leys side of things. Obviously within here we've got some of the yellow flowers, which is the bird's foot trefoil. We've also got some of the pink flowers, which are the sandfoin. Both of those plants are high tannin plants, so they will help with naturally deworming the animals to some extent. And whilst we're not on daily moves quite here on the farm, I have toyed with daily moves previously with my livestock. We do move every sort of 5 days max, and once I get a few more bits of infrastructure in place, we will be back to doing daily moves for the cows. So you combine the daily moving and these naturally anthelmintic plants within these diverse Herbal Leys, and you get to a situation where you don't have to use synthetic anthelmintics, so synthetic wormers. You don't have to use that on your animals. Ecologically, that is just tremendous. You only have to look at a couple of dung pats around here to see the number of holes in them. We went from, so I saw my first dung beetle on the farm last April, so back around about 18 months ago, something like that, or a bit less than 18 months ago, which was so exciting. And at the time, I just had one species of dung beetle. I've now seen at least 10 different species on the farm, and we've got big ones, we've got little ones. It's incredible. They are a key ecological builder on the farm. If you know you've got those species, they also kind of eat slug eggs, they do a ton of other stuff, and they feed a load of birds and mammals on the farm as well. So they're really beginning to grow the ecology on the farm. You can't do that without having this really diverse Herbal Ley, because otherwise you'll be using those synthetic wormers and you'll be killing those dung beetles before they have a chance to really kind of lay hold on the farm. And then by doing all this diversity and by having the livestock on top of it, that then enables me to grow my diverse heritage wheats that I also grow on the farm. So I can grow those, which are kind of really delicious. They've also, one of the things that we're trying to figure out at the moment is if they do genuinely have a higher nutrient content in terms of micronutrition, but that's something I feel quite passionately they probably do. And it really enables all the different types of farming to happen. So for me, yeah, a diverse farming system is absolutely key. And again, it's why I've implemented agroforestry as well, because it doesn't work anymore with fluctuating prices and such volatility in the system. It doesn't work just to be working off one income stream on farming, such as combinable crops. For me, to ensure that your cash flow is going to be even year on year, you've really got to make sure you've got the livestock, you've got grain to sell, and perhaps even fruit and nuts, and maybe even some market garden fruit and veg as well. So I'm really looking at kind of implementing all those different farming streams on the farm here to ensure that I've got a really consistent output of cash flow going forward. For me, this is actually one of the most exciting parts of the farm that we're on at the moment. This is a project I've been working on for a few years. I don't actually have funding for it yet, so it's personal funding, but this is a project which I call the Wild Seam. And from a livestock management perspective, I think this is really, really kind of exciting for what we're doing here. So essentially what I wanted to make sure is that my livestock have got the ability to graze in all the interesting parts of the farm. Last Christmas, my breeding cows actually came into this field, and I made the effort of actually fencing along this line here to make sure that I kept all of these trees, this little bit of a ditch line, into the paddock that they grazed in. That actually then gave them the ability to have shade, or more importantly at the time of year, protection from the rain. Under these trees, they actually knocked off some of the lower boughs, they did a lot of rubbing there, they grazed down in this ditch. And what that's actually enabled is kind of a whole new plethora of growth to actually suddenly come, this has all come quite recently, to actually grow here that wouldn't have a chance to grow before because there are a load of dead reeds standing there. And actually this Wild Seam project, some of which is actually encompassing some sown Herbal Leys already, this extends right through the middle of the farm and includes some amazing wide ditches in here, some incredible diverse reed banks. And I think the ability now that I'm going to open this area up to livestock is going to be fantastic. We're going to get such kind of unknown results out of it by having kind of dynamic destruction via the ruminants on here. I think it's going to be really exciting. In terms of, I mentioned the fact that we have no funding for this yet. The way I'm actually funding it is because the way that I've paid for a lot of the Herbal Leys, and indeed also the legume fallows that I've got on the farm and the winter bird food, is by using countryside stewardship. Much as though I don't think those stewardship options are particularly fantastic, what they have enabled me to do is start progressing on some of these much more interesting projects. And for the time being, some of this land that's in the wild seam will be, in theory, in the stewardship option of either legume fallow or the Herbal Ley, and so I get paid for it still. But yeah, this project over the next 5 years is just going to start looking absolutely superb. We're standing here in my agroforestry field. This is actually the project so far that I'm actually most proud of that I've completed on the farm. We established around about 7,000 trees here in this field. It's a 20-hectare field back in the sort of winter of 2020. And there are a number of reasons why I wanted to incorporate agroforestry onto the farm. The first one was I wanted to show other farmers how it was possible to farm with trees in a normal farming system. So we've actually gone for 6-metre belts with 2 rows of trees up them and 36-metre alleys in between to grow crops or rear livestock on. I did it this way because a lot of people in this area have got 36-metre sprayers, and so they're going to go up and down like this. For me, this field is actually in organic conversion, and I'm planning on farming it organically, so the ability to have 36-metre wide machinery is not necessarily as important for me. But I really wanted the agroforestry for lots of agronomic reasons. For the kind of organic purposes, these belts where we've got the trees growing are obviously an absolutely superb place for all the kind of nature, the bugs, the beneficial insects to hang out and have a permanent place called home. That's going to mean if I have any pests in the middle of my fields, they're going to be able to come out there and attack those pests, and it's going to mean I can farm without some of those synthetic inputs that I've been so used to previously as an arable farmer. Obviously from a livestock point of view, at the moment the trees aren't big enough to do very much, but if we give it 10 years, they're going to be in amongst here. They've got trees to rub on, they've got trees to have shade or shelter from the wind and the rain under, so that's really important. But the most important thing actually is in terms of ecological and nature pathways on the farm. We've got the wild seam as a really major feature running through the middle of the farm. Then we've got wild margins coming off that wild seam and going up the side of every single field. And then obviously we've got these belts of trees that come off that wild margin coming through the middle of the field, and essentially what it's trying to do is eliminate desertification from the middle of any arable crops that I've got on the farm. This was actually based on something an entomologist said to me, and he said that basically some insects will go as far as maybe 50 metres out from a margin, but most will go about 20 metres out. And that to me stuck in my head and made me think, well, if you want no desertification in the middle of your fields, your maximum field width is 40 metres, which is how I end up with these being 36 here. But it's a really exciting project. It looks beautiful. It really feels like a kind of generational project as well, like something I can feel proud of for a really long time. I can't wait to see what it comes out like in the next 10 and 20 years. We have planted a whole plethora of types of trees in this field. So actually the belt we're standing in, we've got quince here, 56 quince trees, and then a load of plums up here. There are a few different varieties of plums, trying to figure out what works on the farm. But then growing up the field, we've got cherries up there, we've got pears and walnuts, and all those obvious sorts of fruits, apples obviously, and cob nuts. But also I tried to be a little bit experimental. We're obviously expecting temperatures to rise. The kind of angle of this field means it normally avoids frost, so also here I'm trialling apricots, peaches, nectarines, almonds, and there may be some other bits in the mix as well in the future. A lot of this was always designed to be an experimental project. I never particularly had it in mind that I need to harvest the fruit. Obviously my plan is to harvest the fruit, but if some fruit drops on the floor and ends up getting eaten by livestock, that's also not an issue. Really the plan was for this field to tell me what works across the rest of the farm. But then on top of the fruit and nut, we also do have some belts of timber. Essentially we've got a timber run running up the middle, and then we've got birch on the outside. The current plan is in about 15 years time we might start tapping the birch for sugar in the same way they do in Canada with maple trees. But again, if we get global warming, climate change, it's probably going to be warm. But ultimately, if we get global warming or climate change, then in all likelihood it's going to be too warm to be tapping those trees for the sap. However, they're obviously still a great agroforestry, an agroforestry thing to have in here. We also then do have belts of willow. Partly they're being grown for the fact they're great medicinally for the livestock, and you can obviously coppice them and use that in wood chip for compost on the farm. But again, they grow really quickly, so from a kind of other people coming on the farm and seeing the impacts of agroforestry, they're a great one to see first of all. On top of that, as a really fun thing, I've got some interesting wild margins here where I'm trying to implement new fruits on the farm. So I've got a load of new different fruits coming on. We've got currants and berries, lots of different types of them. And the aim is that they're going to be able to be dropped all over the farm, and those seeds are going to have the chance to grow and really boost the plant diversity here on the farm. In terms of planting the trees, some of the trees, so the whips, the sort of woodland trees, we actually planted those just with a completely normal spade method and healed them in. So we just made a hole with a spade, healed them in, and that was that, nothing too fancy. In terms of the trees that actually had a proper root ball, either pots or bare roots, we actually planted them with an auger on the digger. So we've got I think it's a 200 mil auger on the digger. We drilled the hole and then we planted the tree in that, which made the job an awful lot quicker. However, whenever you plant a tree, you're always told not to plant it in a circular hole, or the roots will go round and round. So actually we did smash up the sides of those holes to make sure the roots had escape roots as well from that. Initially we did use compostable mats around the bottom of the trees to prevent grass growth, but it became apparent very, very quickly that those compostable mats were next to useless. They were meant to last 4 years, they actually lasted around about 6 months. So this year we've gone to the expense of carting an awful lot of wood chip and putting a 1 metre, 10 centimetre deep area of wood chip around the bottom of every tree, which has been quite time consuming to do, but seems to really be doing the trick in terms of grass suppression around the bottom of the trees. Farming with nature is actually one of the key things that I'm trying to do here on the farm. It's actually kind of the main tenet for me as a farmer in terms of agroecological farming. And so nature is kind of the main thing on my brain the whole time. I'm trying to implement nature to be as good as possible. A lot of this is actually behind a decision for me to move towards organic farming. So the field we're in, which has got the agroforestry in, is actually in organic conversion, and it will be fully organic from September of 2022, and the rest of the farm is actually going into organic conversion from this coming autumn. And essentially, I feel that if we're going to farm with nature and use nature's toolkit, that means categorically not using pesticides and synthetic fertilizers here in the farm, hence why organic is such a natural process to go towards. In terms of farming with nature, very simply, I can't help but fall in love with ecology. Since I've been on the farm, I spend a lot of time sitting next to hedgerows, sitting on the banks of ponds, things like that, and just seeing what happens in terms of nature. I'm really trying to work out why that's important to a farming system, how I can encourage it, and how I can add that beauty to the farming system. The joy of these Herbal Leys is obviously just how incredibly stunning they are, the beautiful flowers that they produce for such a long part of the year, doing such a tremendous job in terms of pollinators on the farm. But obviously, it's, as well as that, I'm looking to really build life into my soil as well, because if you start getting the ecological soil web moving and working, then the higher trophic layers, the higher kind of species can begin feeding off each other, and we're going to start seeing small mammals, larger mammals, and also then birds of prey appearing on the farm as well. For me, that's the side of farming that I find really, really exciting, encouraging all that ecology to exist on the farm. And already after kind of 3 or 4 years of that being a main focus, I'm seeing some really, really exciting changes on that front coming about. This is my crop of heritage wheat, or it's my field of heritage wheats plural. I've got 11 varieties that I'm growing this year. And you can see they're really tall. I might not be the tallest guy, but I'm around about 5'10", 10 and a half. And a lot of these are sort of pretty close to my height. The great thing about these heritage crops is they don't just grow tall, which is obviously great from a weed suppression basis, but they also chuck really deep roots down. And that is obviously really critical. We haven't actually followed the Herbal Leys yet with a variety of wheat like this, but this is totally the plan. These crops are going to do amazingly when they start tapping into all that nutrition that the Herbal Leys give. But in terms of why I like growing these crops, for one, they just look absolutely stunning. You compare that with a conventional wheat crop that grows sort of 18 inches tall, something like that. These are just a different kettle of fish. And as well as that, in here we've got loads of different orange varieties in this mix here, but we've got varieties down the field that have got sort of really orange straws or have got orange heads. The heads on these will actually go a really lustrous sort of bluey purple colour when they start dying off. And it's just a really vibrant way of farming. Obviously, a lot of this relies on being able to do something with the flower, and I did move to choosing to buy a flour mill, which I've got in the farmyard, which means I do have to process these into flour as well. But it's a really exciting business that I've taken on the farm, and yeah, I think it gives my farm an awful lot more vitality and excitement to have these things growing here. This is my mill room. The mill behind me is actually all the way from America. It's a new American stone mill featuring Vermont granite, so actually proper stones rather than composite stones or anything like that. Essentially, we've got grain comes in the top, gets milled between the two stones, and then either comes out as wholemeal flour from the front or runs through a set of sieves on the side where it gets sieved to different fractions of flour. And then we can either bag it manually or it can go through to another hopper and get automatically bagged here. This was a really important purchase for me. This was what enabled me to look at doing the heritage wheats, or actually I started growing the heritage wheats and realised this was a very necessary way to be able to market those heritage wheats. And I'm looking very much at a similar approach with the cattle as well moving forward. So I'm not particularly looking at doing retail sales. I do still fervently believe that farmers should be wholesalers, and that's not to say it's wrong for a farmer to be a retailer. It's amazing. It's just an awful lot of work. And so consequently, I'm looking at trying to be wholesale or trade as much as possible. So either deal directly with this instance to medium bakers, medium scale bakers. And on the meat front, I'm looking to sell kind of whole animals into butchers on that front. But yeah, direct sales is a really important part of the business model moving forward, getting that connection and getting people really to understand why my type of farming is a really good type of farming that should be supported, and one that maybe they're willing to pay a bit of a premium for.